Strap yourself in
because we're set up, switched on and ready to go.
Welcome everybody to the Entrepreneur's Survival Guide. Here we welcome our very first guest on the podcast, which is awesome to have James Powys from ICS Business Coaching. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Martin.
Great to have you on board. What we're going to look at today is exploring James's story about how he became self-employed, how he took a step into the big wide world of setting up your own business and going forward. Because I think one of the great things out there is we've all got a story to share. And when we share that story, we can learn from each other's challenges, successes, the actions they've taken, and hopefully learn something from that to help us get to our goals and reach the success that we're looking for. So, first of all, James, tell us a little bit about where you were before you set up ICS.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I'd had 25 years or so in the corporate world, mainly in the drinks industry, actually. And actually, the last 18 years was spent at Britvic Soft Drinks, in a variety of roles, actually. So Britvic was a great organisation where I'd had the opportunity to try lots of new things. So I did roles in marketing, across different sales positions, then into L&D or learning and development, and then more latterly into talent and leadership. So good, almost 2 decades in Britvic Soft Drinks. Okay,
so and you did a range of different departments, and you spent 20 years there. So man and boy almost, I guess. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, you started to look at venturing out and setting up your own business. So what was going on internally? How did that thought process start to come about?
Good question. So I guess there's a couple of things that were driving it for a long time. So the first thing was, ever since a young age, I knew that I wanted to have my own business or do my own thing. But for a number of years, I was unsure what that might be, and I had certain ideas. So I always knew there was an aspiration to hopefully add a lot of value within the corporate world, but also take learning from that to apply it to something that I do of my own, that's my own. So that had been a long ambition. Also, my key motivator was learning. So my key motivator, at every point I was very conscious of to what level am I learning, and actually where do I want to grow. And then I was actually very conscious and planned with my career to say, okay, if these are the areas I want to grow and learn in, what will be the right roles in or outside of this business to help me do it? And I was very fortunate that the Britvic business was big enough for me to try lots of new things, and I could learn a lot of those skills and gain a lot of those experiences within that organisation, albeit, as you say, across different functions, and I think 9 or 10 different roles over those 18 years.
Okay, so there's a lot of different functions you were able to learn, but at the same time, there was an awful lot of questions about the future and where the future might go to carry on that journey towards your goals and your vision of where life should go. What were some of the considerations that you had about things on the outside, so family and job security and that kind of stuff, before you stepped into the world of being self-employed?
Yeah, good. So, yeah, I mean, I live in the Midlands, and the office was in the southeast. So typically I was spending, 2, 3, 4 days a week away from home, including overnights. So, I started to recognise that was having an impact on family life. I've got 2 stepkids, and a wife, and so I noticed that the routine and regularity of being away, it was having a bit of an impact. So that was a consideration, and therefore I was thinking, how can I still feel fulfilled and provide for the family, but not be chained to the southeast with quite so much regularity. So that was a huge consideration. And I guess internally, when you've been with a business for such a long period of time, you can have, and I definitely had a limiting belief around my value was in this business, and actually did I have something to offer, or did I have the same level of value outside of the business? So I had to explore and conquer that. That was the biggest challenge.
Okay, so in terms of exploring and conquering that challenge, how did you go about that?
Well, I'm quite an extroverted individual and love meeting new people. So what I did, both based on the role I was doing at the time over the last 2 or 3 years in leadership and talent, it was important for me to, because I was I'd moved into that space relatively recently, for me to continue to learn really quickly. So what I wanted to do is to learn from experts across different industries, different suppliers. So I made a point of bringing those into the Britvic business so that I could see what value they might be able to bring to the business, but at the same time building relationships and contacts. And through doing that, I guess I started to think, actually, I can do some of this. And actually, it wasn't something that was as difficult to grip or grasp. And then started to get some feedback. Started to do a little bit of a few things outside of work. And then actually, what helped for me as well was I was able to almost codify what talent, behaviour and leadership was through doing some sort of extracurricular qualifications.
Right, okay. So you took on board some extra qualifications, you used your network around you to build that confidence and reassurance and put a toe in the water outside of the corporate world and that security. And at the end of the day, map out the process of what you wanted to do. Is that right in saying?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
And that allowed you to make sure that what I seem to be hearing is at Britvic it started to get into very much the comfort zone, which isn't surprising after that period of time. And I think for a lot of people, when they step out from that kind of security of a employed job into the world of setting up their own business, it can be very much jumped straight from the comfort zone to the panic zone, and that can cause some challenges. But you'd mapped out the process in a way that took you gently as it could be, from comfort zone to stretch zone, and you managed to stay out that panic zone most of the time. Would that be right in saying that?
Yeah. So there are a few things really. I guess as I was working with or talking to providers, external consultants, with a view to how they could help the business I was in, I was also talking to them and understanding how a future relationship could work if I ever stepped away, and understanding the level of support and confidence that they were giving me. So that was very important. I'm not a very risk, or I'm quite risk averse. So I don't like a lot of risk in my life. And I guess it was a big decision, and it took me at least 2.5, 3 years to finally make the decision that it was happening, because I could sense that I was learning at a slower pace, and it took a long time for me to get that confidence to do it. And what I was able to do, I was guided by a lovely little image that I saw on the internet that I cut out and framed, and it was sat on my windowsill for 3 years, which said, entrepreneurialism. A few years of doing things that most people daren't, to live a life that most people can't. So that was my inspiration. That was on my windowsill, and I kept looking at it and going, could I? And then what I also did is I worked out the cost, risk, benefit of doing it. So I looked at, if I jumped from a business with no redundancy or package, what would the risk be of having 12 months to try and plough my own path or create something? But then I worked out what would the benefits be over the next 20 years if it was a success. And that allowed me to go, the risk of failure is not insignificant, but actually it was worth it in as much as the potential benefits over a couple of decades.
Yeah.
So that allowed me to do that. And then what I also did, which was my first piece of advice, or my biggest piece of advice, is I was also able to make that decision. It wasn't an emotional decision to leave the business. It was a very measured and planned decision. And what I was able, therefore, to do for 2 to 3 years was to save up some working capital for the business. Okay, so I knew I had probably 18 months worth of bills and life costs that would enable, if I didn't earn a single penny for at least 12 months, meant it wasn't going to force me into compromising what I wanted to do or rushing back into employment. So that was the biggest thing for me, really, making sure that there was something there that didn't force me into making too many early decisions that weren't going to be helpful for the long term.
Okay, so it was a good 3 to 5 year rolling plan, almost, by the sounds of it, to make sure there wasn't any knee-jerk reaction and that you didn't take rash decisions and hasty decisions in terms of how you're setting up your business and running your business, and you had a backup plan there as well at the same time.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned that that's all a logical process. I'm a big believer that all decisions and commitments have an emotional decision first and foremost before the logic backs it up. Was that true for yourself, even if it was a flash in the pan of like how excited you might be of having a successful business, or what it might be in terms of a legacy of what you're leaving for your family? Was there any kind of emotional bit there, if you reflect back, just before you started making the logical process?
There was, but it did have a healthy slice of logic. So what I did was I recognised that all the questions I was asking myself was, what if, in a negative perspective, what if this doesn't work, or what are the risks? I was looking at very much more, what are the risks of it not working? And it took a moment for me to actually recognise that and then reframe it to actually what are the risks of staying and not doing this? And actually what I identified, or it became apparent, was there were more risks associated to staying than there were to going, in terms of the fact that the damage it was having on my family life and being away, the fact that that my learning was slowing, and that I wasn't sort of collecting new experiences to be able to grow me as an individual, and also the risk of, if you like, becoming bored, and the impact that has on how you feel and how you show up. Plus, there were also 1 or 2 things happening internally within the business where I was questioning whether it was as close a fit with my value set as the business perhaps had been. Changes that may have been very well for the good, but certainly made me question, was I as kind of married to or wed to the business as I perhaps had been historically. Okay,
so particular drivers that I picked up there is the burning desire to grow personally, the love of the family, and the certainty of wanting a great future as well, before planning out the logical process of taking a step into.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, again, through one of the things I did that we talked into a little bit earlier was I became accredited in Insight Discovery, which is a personality profiling tool. And what I recognised through that was I thought I had a high level of self-awareness, but actually, once you nudge yourself out of your comfort zone, you have an opportunity to learn every single day. And I did a lot of learning in the last sort of 4 or 5 years at Britvic as I stretched and pushed myself further. What I recognised was one of my key motivators is a level of control. And actually, within a bigger business, one of the compromises for being part of a business, the security and the benefits of being part of that business is, of course, you compromise your level of control because you are in a business and you conform to the needs of the business, the culture of the business, and the strategies of that business. And what I felt was the business was starting to go in a slightly different direction, and actually a lot of my time was not on the things that I felt were important or weren't really value add. And I felt that actually, obviously, if you set up as your own business or an entrepreneur, you have greater control over what you do, how you do it, and when you do it. So there was something about taking even greater control of of my career and kind of mapping my own destiny.
Yeah. I think there was a mentor that I was listening to the other day, and he very much used the Wizard of Oz and deciding, mapping out. So Simon Sinek talks about, you know, your why and what's your driver and why. And this was a slightly different take on it. It worked really well for me in terms of what's your Oz.
Yeah, okay.
What
okay,
is Oz?
Okay.
And then what's your yellow brick road to get there?
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you had that very much defined in terms of what is your Oz.
Yeah.
You know, what's the wicked witch of the east, and that might be the changing in the corporate, not quite going where you want to be, and the, you know, the growth and stuff that we've mentioned all before. So, what is it you're trying to get away from? What's the driver from? What's pushing you, and what's pulling you, and how are you going to design that yellow brick road to get you there and go along that journey? And I think, interestingly, you've also mentioned there another part of the fantastic story about the Wizard of Oz is having people around you. Now that's what you mentioned there was you've not got a team of employed people around you, but you built a team around you of friends, colleagues, acquaintances, leverage your network. And I think that's a really important thing to do, that when we go out by ourselves, we feel alone, but actually we can build a team using our network, even if it's just one or two people of that support mechanism to help get us to us. It can help the journey go along so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the second thing I draw out as a real recommendation is make sure you have absolutely got the right people around you. So I had a formal and an informal mentor. So Stephen Edney from Expression for Growth, he had very much taken this journey a number of years before, now looking at as leading and owning a successful global business. So a good friend and someone that we used in the business at Britvic, and he was really helpful in helping me understand what does a formula for success to look like, what were the potential pitfalls I might fall into, and where I had any naivety, sort of nipping that in the bud quite quickly. And then there was another lady, Jo Wright. She was about probably 12 to 18 months ahead of me, so she'd taken a similar journey, but much more recently. And hearing how happy she was and the success she was having, and her encouragement gave me that confidence to kind of take the leap.
Fab. Okay, so brilliant story there. So you've now been going for about a year, just coming up to a year from O'Reilly. Yeah. Despite trying to see into the future and forecast some of the challenges and such like, what has probably been one of the greatest challenges over that period of time that you've had to face since starting the business?
So I think I will normally tend to act on instinct or emotion, as opposed to going through sort of painstaking sort of data analysis and planning. So for me, what I wanted to do is I had a feeling or a sense that there were opportunities and there was a need for what I had to offer. The first thing to do was to actually to make sure that I wasn't trying to be too broad. But equally, what I didn't want to do was to be too niche, because I wasn't going to do loads and loads and loads of market analysis and data. I just got a feeling and a sense that there were businesses I could help on a smaller scale, or certainly outside of the business that I was employed in, and that I had something unique that I could bring. So the biggest challenge for me initially was how broad should that scope be? Not too niche, not too broad. So I actually had two propositions, which I stepped out and I kind of worked on both, and that actually worked really well for me, because what I was able to do, if I just had one was much more successful than the other. If I just had the one, and the one I would have gone for was the one that took probably 60% of my time, 70% of my time maybe in the first 6 months, but probably 5% of my revenue. And that was the business coaching. And what I realised was, on reflection, I was trying to build a new network in a new space with new contacts, which takes time. And maybe at a point in time I'll dial that back up, but I need to be more patient. At the same time, I had a proposition around teams and helping leaders in the corporate world. And actually what was happening was I realised that my strong network in that space was decaying, because I was focusing on something else. So what I realised and had to make a decision on was to slow down and park the proposition around business coaching, stay on the path or accelerate the path on leadership and teams. And again, probably another big tip here for me is absolutely rekindle and focus on that network of people that know, hopefully like and trust you, because having conversation, dialogue and finding opportunity with those people can be much faster than starting from scratch as strangers.
Yeah.
So finding the reason or a need to rekindle those conversations, catching up for coffee, having the courage to ask them for people that they might feel might be in need of the services that you're offering, and not being afraid to ask for support and help, not being too proud to call in some of those favours that hopefully in my years through learning and development, leadership and teams, whereby I had hopefully given, it was actually fine to ask or call a few favours back in.
Okay, so not being afraid. There is so much great stuff in there. So you particularly spoke about not having a shotgun approach as you went out into business, but also not having a sniper approach either.
Yeah, good, yeah.
And it's somewhere in the middle of not being too laser focused and not being too widespread. I mean, the other thing that we picked up on there was the ability to take imperfect action. And a lot of entrepreneurs, I've come across them, they are either frozen by analysis paralysis, the fear of getting it wrong, the fear of somebody else doing better than them, and actually that vulnerability to ask for help and say, I'm not perfect, what support can you offer me? And B, I'm facing the fear and I'm going to do it anyway and take the action. And I'm going to learn from that action. That was another thing that I picked up from all that. So that's a massive amount of advice for people out there.
Absolutely. And then just being with the people around you, the people you respect in this world, is taking them off a pedestal. Stop looking up to them and looking more across to them. Also recognising that maybe working with some very, very experienced leaders or business owners, but actually what I found actually more recently is by finding your focus, finding your niche in what it is, i.e. it's teams, working with leaders and teams, it gives you that inner confidence that actually, whilst you might be working with people who are incredibly bright, incredibly experienced, incredibly successful leaders, it might be that now I have focused on an area and gone deep into that area, that I hopefully have something at least to share, perspective, and because I've focused on it, something to bring to even the most sort of experienced leader.
Sounds fantastic, and I think there's an awful lot that we can all learn from that in terms of how we step forward and take action, definitely, in terms of making sure we build a successful business up. Because one of the things that I picked up in terms of what you're saying, that at no point in this conversation have you said, actually, this solution was going to earn me £1 million overnight and this solution was going to earn me zero or whatever. And actually, it's all about what you want and what you'll enjoy the most and what you're most passionate about. And the money's almost secondary. I'm sure you didn't take the business decision looking at it going, there's no money in this at all, but I love it, I'm going to do it anyway. But first and foremost, it was your passion, your wants and your desires to test and measure two different things and see what worked for you.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Cynic and finding your why. For me, it was about, because both of my propositions were consistent with that why. So for me, it is absolutely about helping individuals and teams to achieve far more than they ever considered possible. Okay, so unlocking those limiting beliefs, giving them a platform and a springboard and the confidence to be bold and to try new things. So the business coaching did that in an SME world, and the leadership and teams does that in a slightly more back into the corporate world. But the why connected both of them. So yeah, so that fundamentally, and again, it's an interesting one between, there are different views around, some people say follow your passion, others say, do that with caution, because if it is too hobbyist, then is it going to pay the bills? Have you got that financial freedom that allows you truly to do what you love? And I think my view is make sure you're clear on who you're talking to or who would buy your services, what their issues and needs are, and that you have a solution and experience to help them in that space. And I think as you become hopefully more successful and more established, you can make more choices to go further into what you love, when you've hopefully got a little bit more financial freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear this all the time. People talking about follow your passion. What do you enjoy the most? Go out and set up one business. And then they negate some of the basic fundamentals of business about, is there actually a market out there for the people to buy this product? I quite enjoy shredding paper. It's quite relaxing, it's quite enjoyable. But I'm not going to set up a business where I just shred paper all day long or try and do podcasts on how to shred paper creatively. I don't think there's much of a market out there. So you've got to stack all those up in a row, really, to see whether it actually does fit into a business. So yes, try and find something you're passionate about, or try and find something you enjoy, but make sure there's a business model that fits around it and can make you the profit that you need to run a successful business and to have the lifestyle that you desire.
Absolutely.
As well. So yeah, definitely all those things come into mind. That's brilliant. Fantastic for taking us through that journey, James. Really appreciate it. I think there's so much useful stuff in there.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.